Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you, Larry, for the great work this morning. I had the privilege to sit in on a training that Larry and his team conducted on business planning and found it incredibly helpful to my organization and to us as we were heading down the path of social enterprise. The objective of my presentation today is give you a 50,000-foot overview of continuity of operations planning, or COOP is the way I say the acronym, or business continuity planning. Regardless of which term you give it, it's essentially the same thing. The materials I'm using today were developed by, Larry talked about stealing from others. We stole this from FEMA. It was developed by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security, and then adopted for our use, or adapted for our use today. So we're only talking about areas that are relevant to you and your organizations. We won't be going into continuity of government and all of the sophisticated elements of COG. Oops, sorry. The objectives are to provide a little bit of insight to the COOP process, to define terms, to explain elements of a viable COOP, to provide insight to what might trigger a COOP for your organization and for your family. We're going to be talking a little bit again about defining the scope of a COOP, the authority for the COOP, and that's very important. Larry talked about in his organization, one of his employees being really key to that organization, in addition to himself. Knowing who those key employees are within your organization, who knows what, that brain trust is a critical consideration when developing your COOP. COOP overview, again, elements in the impacts that would trigger a COOP. And here's the definition. A COOP should include the activities of individual departments within your organization to ensure that essential functions are performed. I'll pick on United Way. Some of the activities of United Way may not be essential to the organization on an ongoing basis, but as partners with United Way, you know that if their 211 function is inoperable, you're going to inherit a lot of phone calls from your clients, from those that you're serving, because they can't gain access to that information from United Way. That's one of the reasons United Way has within their COOP relocation of their 211 function to the public safety building, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Definition and scope. Plans and procedures to ensure that essential functions are performed. Tests, training, and exercises essential to ensure its viability within your organizations. And the training, tests, and exercises are key components. Brace just conducted a continuity of operations plan exercise in collaboration with chambers of commerce throughout our area, and got great feedback on what it revealed to those organizations about their business continuity plans and about elements that were missing within their business continuity plans. And it's for all hazards, natural disasters. Larry, before you leave, I see you getting ready to walk out. I know that you know this number. How many businesses closed after Hurricane Ivan, just to provide a context for folks?
We lost roughly 37% of our business population, which translates to in the neighborhood of 4,300.
It's important to recognize in that the national statistics from Department of Labor are that 40% of businesses that close for 72 hours or more will never reopen. An additional 25% of businesses that initially reopen will be closed permanently within 2 years. The statistics are dramatically worse for businesses without a COOP or a business continuity plan. but it has to include all of these kinds of hazards. We know that we're subject to hurricanes in Northwest Florida. We're also pretty vulnerable to tornadoes, but not on the magnitude of the Midwest, for example. We know that man-made disasters like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill had very significant economic impact on our community, and we know that the roll-down effect is that when businesses are impacted, nonprofit organizations are in turn impacted. Technological issues could include things like a computer virus that is deliberately caused. National security emergencies. We live in a community with a number of military bases, and that increases our vulnerability as a community simply because they are going to be targets of other nations should we ever find ourselves in a situation where we're under attack. When I served with the American Red Cross of Northwest Florida, because of the geography covered by that chapter, 4 counties in Northwest Florida that includes Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Corey, Softway, Eglin Air Force Base, Hurlburt Field. I was in the second class that went through the Clara Barton Weapons of Mass Destruction course, and we were prioritized based on the vulnerability of our jurisdiction to major disasters related to national security emergencies. From a planning perspective, ensure that the continued performance of essential functions are performed within your organization, and those are pieces that you have to define within your own organization. I can assure you that I hope that, and I know that they have, planned for your organizations to receive checks from United Way as an essential business function of that organization. Again, 211 is another story. They need to be operating throughout the disaster, not just to be able to restart operations within 30 days. Reduce loss of life, minimize damage. The United Way building is in a Category 3 storm surge inundation zone, not the place I want to be when I'm trying to conduct business during a disaster. So Brace relocates to the public safety building along with Northwest Florida 211 staff, and we have a room within that facility. That building is hardened to 200 miles per hour wind speeds. It has redundant water sources, has redundant internet capabilities, has its own water system. So we're in a facility where we are in a position to be able to restart our operations literally within minutes. Ensure succession of office to key leadership. Again, Larry talked about the importance of a couple of individuals within his organization. If you get run over by a bus tomorrow during a disaster, who calls the staff together? Who takes the next steps involved in deciding what are the key functions you will undertake if you don't have a continuity of operations plan? Reduce and mitigate disruptions to operations. One of the ways to do that is make sure your employees are prepared. Rebuild Northwest Florida that Larry mentioned earlier has a program that's doing hardening of homes throughout our community. What many of you may not know is that Rebuild staff have also helped with mitigation funding or writing grants for mitigation funding for some of the nonprofits within our community. Protect essential assets, that's records, that's hardware, that's data available to your organization, and achieve timely recovery. Timely recovery has to be defined by each organization. The general standard is you need to be able to resume essential functions within 12 hours of triggering the continuity of operations plan. Coop plans must be capable of implementing anytime and with and without notice. A hurricane event is going to provide us notice. Our community's been impacted, as one of our churches in our community is well aware, Greater Little Rock, with no notice, and that impacted their daycare facilities and other church operations. So that provided very, very little notice to that organization. In the case of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we found ourselves as Brace being called into the Emergency Operations Center at 8 a.m. on May 1st, 2010. By noon the next day, emergency management had asked us to coordinate and deploy volunteers to 2 different coastlines, Pensacola Beach, Perdido Key Beach. We mobilized 950 volunteers over that period of time and were able to deploy them, but it was because we had a continuity of operations and disaster plan that we were able to do that on a weekend when we had no other means of communication other than internet and using the media and communicating with our partners. We talked about being able to start within 12 hours of activation and be able to sustain operations for 30 days. I certainly found when I was serving with the Red Cross after Hurricane Ivan that we didn't return to routine operations until 60 days after the event. You heard from Andrea a little bit about our impact during Hurricane Katrina. We found we weren't able to return to routine operations again until 60 days after the event. Elements of a viable Coop include all of the things that you see on the screen, and these screenshots are included in the packet. I will pick on a couple of them. Alternative facilities, and you've heard me speak of this already. It's no time to be looking for alternative facilities during a disaster because I can assure you, FEMA, state government, county government will have an opportunity to have first choice of those properties. You need to have contingent agreements in place prior to the disaster to ensure that you can transition from your normal operations to Coop operations within 12 business hours after the event. Interoperable communications, landlines may be down, cell towers may be overloaded. Emergency management has capabilities built into their cell phones that override any communications that the average person in the public will be able to provide. A GETS system actually provides 4 tiers of communications before we in the public have access to those towers during times of emergencies. Vital records include your personnel records, tax records, things of that nature. We'll be talking about that as we go through. Essential functions, most important planning elements, those things that you know you have to be able to resume, again, within 12 hours, and identify staffing. And I'm going to stop on staffing for a minute. Brace in some of our key leadership had the privilege of consulting in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. What we heard from business leader after business leader was these were larger businesses. They did have continuity of operations plans that were really viable. What they didn't drill down on was to ensure that their key leadership staff had plans for themselves and for their families. When those key leaders evacuated the area during Hurricane Katrina, they weren't able to return in a timely manner, and they didn't have the depth in those continuity of operations plans to have other individuals trained and capable of performing those key personnel functions during a disaster like Katrina, and those businesses were among the many that failed. Vital information.
Greg, I'd like to expand on that
Sure.
just a little bit. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Skip Hausch. I'm the board chairman for Brace. And what that means is I do whatever Greg tells me to do.
So true.
One of the things that I think in the FEMA that's lacking in this FEMA material, and Greg has started to touch on it, but I really think it's important, is that businesses need to make sure that their staff members have an individual disaster plan for themselves. You could have the best disaster plan for your business in the world, And if your people don't show up because they were not prepared, you're out of luck. You're not going to be able to start up if your people were not prepared and are unable to get back to work. So there's an opportunity here for you with your staff to start pushing them in the direction of developing their own individual disaster plans for their family and for their home. Because, you know, without them, life is tough. I'm sorry, Greg.
It's all right. And we'll be talking about that more before we conclude this morning. Whoop. The essential functions are those activities that you must continue to perform regardless of the circumstances. Again, be able to restart them within 12 hours and be able to carry them on for 30 days. The number of staff, again, make sure that there's redundancy, people are cross-trained in their functions, ensure that the skill information is transferred. That's part of the training activity associated with the Coop. Provide them experience. On an annual basis, Escambia County participates in the statewide hurricane exercise. During that exercise, I make sure that I am in the Emergency Operations Center instead of the Brace Disaster Operations Center, because I want to make sure my number 2 is able to carry on those essential functions, is able to manage that response to a disaster. I've been there, I've done that, I've got the t-shirt during times of disaster. I want to make sure she has plenty of opportunities to exercise after having been trained in those functions so that she can carry on with some level of comfort. Availability, individuals that have family members with special needs need to plan in a very different way than those that don't have special needs and are able to function independently. Make sure that your employees that have family members with special needs have planned in a very deliberate manner for meeting those family needs, because our experience is that, and I'll use Ivan as an example, first responders in our community were faced with the unenviable situation of having to report to emergency duties or care for their children when their child care plans fell through. They took care of their children in large majority. I understand that, but that meant that the public safety wasn't preserved in the same ways that it could have been. Make sure that you're planning for those needs. Timing requirement, again, certain functions aren't essential at 12 hours. Others have to be performed within 30 days. Figure out what that timing is. Delegations of authority. If I get run over by a bus, there's clarity in my organization that Deanna Polen-Stemach, who spent 6 years with FEMA, is going to step in and operate during times of disaster. If she's not capable of performing that function, we have the good fortune that we've got a staff of 3, and our accounting specialist isn't trained in emergency management. But we make sure our board members, key volunteers that are driving our programs and services have been cross-trained and are operating from our dock during times of exercises.
But that means I do help Greg cross the street from time to time.
Delegations of authority need to predefine what that authority includes. It needs to identify the financial authority of the individual that's delegated that authority. Do they have the authority to change policies? Do they have the authority to engage in recruiting national emergency grant employees? And that's a program that is nonprofits you need to be aware of, because within about 72 hours after a presidentially declared disaster, if you have services that must be continued, you may well be eligible for national emergency grant funding. Individuals that have been displaced by that disaster would be available to nonprofit organizations and government to continue those essential functions. And the delegation of authority has those purposes, again, approving changes in your standard operating procedures. At the state government level, there are a number of regulations that are in place all the time, but the governor, under executive order, can change virtually any of those regulations at the stroke of a pen, but those are planned in advance. The executive order for a major disaster is always in a template form, ready for execution, but with additional language added during specific events depending upon magnitude and the needs of partners working with emergency management throughout the country. You need to designate whether that individual has signing authority on contracts, or whether, in the absence of the second tier staff member, whether that reverts to board chair or others within the governance of the organization. Alternative facilities, again, locations that are as far from the hazard as possible. The public safety building is behind the Rave Theater on North W Street. We have a second redundant disaster operations center that's located at University of West Florida. I hope we don't ever get to a point where we have to go to UWF instead of the public safety building, but it is available to us. It's in a hardened facility with many of the redundant systems that I spoke of earlier. Located a safe distance from worst case scenarios. Worst case for me right now is being in a storm surge inundation zone, not where I want to be. So we've relocated. Any time a hurricane is threatening our community, we will relocate. You need to plan for those in advance. Need to know that it can be made operational within 12 hours, and that includes moving your data systems and other hardware technology that are essential to that communications. Having a redundant plan for operating through voice over internet protocols is a good alternative for communications, because again, cell towers are going to be down. The landlines are probably the most sustainable, but there are locations, and there is now technology that's affordable to throw essentially a web of internet capability around a facility for affordable rates. Desirable characteristics, again, supports communications and information technology. Without those, you aren't going to be able to communicate with your internal customers, your staff members, or your external customers or clients. In the case of our continuity plan, we are located at public safety. We have access to food, we have access to sleeping facilities right there in the building, so we haven't had to plan that. Our alternative plan at UWF, we will be co-located with the American Red Cross, and I can assure you they have a food plan in place, and they have agreed to allow us to avail ourselves of those resources. They will bring cots, we will bring sleeping pads, we'll be in great shape. Communications that provide capability to perform essential functions. If your essential functions are making sure you can communicate with your clients, ensuring that there is a means of doing that is a key consideration. In the case of Brace, one of the ways we ensure that we can maintain key communications is our web hosting isn't on a local server. It's hosted in 2 redundant locations on a regional basis that are outside of our area. At the flip of a switch, for all intents and purposes, we move from our day-to-day Brace website to an emergency website that has totally different information on the opening page of that emergency website. That's one of the ways that we've approached this. We also, some folks use Constant Contact. We use the Monkey, MailChimp, as a means of communications with our partners. That's hosted outside of our vulnerable area, so we can push communications to our partners, to our volunteers on a segmented basis through MailChimp, so we're maintaining communications at least as long as they have access to the internet. Some of the things that are critical about interoperable communications are on the screen. You see them. That's in your packet. All of this material is intended for you to take away as you begin to construct your own continuity of operations plan. Vital records are a critical component. The bottom line is these are the emergency operating records and the legal and financial records of your organization. You need to segment them in that manner so that the right people have the right access to the right information, because you don't necessarily want everyone to have access to social security numbers of every employee within your organization, for example. Your plans and directives are how you plan to operate. Orders of succession are to ensure that if you are run over by a bus, it's clear who that second and third in command will be that succeed to the leadership role if I'm gone, if my second in command is gone. Delegations of authority allow them to write checks for $10,000 or to secure a line of credit. Preferably, lines of credit are secured in advance, but those delegations of authority should define what those are. References for, again, essential functions. I can't emphasize enough the importance of essential functions. Here are some of the legal and financial records. Again, personnel, social security, payroll, retirement, insurance records, and contract information. Human capital is what Skip touched on, what I touched on earlier. What first responders, the sheriff's office, emergency management in our community discovered pretty quickly is when the children of first responders were at risk. The parents of those children fulfilled their responsibilities as parents before they fulfilled their responsibilities as emergency responders, and I understand that. The information in your packet is really designed for persons with special needs, but I suspect there are special needs individuals within most of our organizations, or they have family with special needs. By using this tool, and please note the information on the back. This is available in large quantities. If you want to order enough for every board member, every volunteer, your staff, you're able to do that by calling the information on the back of this packet. But it includes walking through a family emergency plan, a disaster supply kit, transportation issues for individuals evacuating from the area. It will walk you through that entire perspective related to human capital and protecting what for most of us in nonprofits are our most valuable asset. The right people doing the right jobs to perform the essential functions. You don't need necessarily, unless you're an organization the size of Brace, every employee reporting to duty. You need those that are essential reporting for duty. If you have individuals that don't perform an essential function, you're better off to have them getting rest, taking care of their families, because at some point those individuals that are performing essential functions are going to need rest, and having them available and fresh can be an enormous asset. But regardless of whether they have an essential function or not, you need to know, your organization needs to know, your supervisors need to know where those employees are, whether they've evacuated the area, when they plan to return, how can they be contacted while they have evacuated the area. Again, some of the lessons learned from Louisiana and the business fallout that resulted from that, and frankly the social services network frayed to the breaking point in Louisiana because the businesses weren't operating, funds weren't flowing to nonprofit organizations, and social services deteriorated. Invest in training. There are resources available You have this this pamphlet in your packet, ready.gov. The website is on it. It provides access to another template, not the one included in your packet, but an automated fillable template that you can use to prepare your continuity of operations plan, but it includes training information, it includes some drills or exercises on the ready.gov website under the business tab, and then just keep looking until you find the business continuity planning template. The plan needs to tell employees where to go and what to do. Some of the individuals will be performing functions that will not be typical within their job description, and assigning those essential functions to them as a part of their job description is an important component, because otherwise especially using certain employees, you can find yourselves in a little bit of a challenge if you aren't including those alternative responsibilities. Ensuring that you're capable of supporting continued execution of the essential functions is, again, a key component. That's why non-essential personnel should be getting rest, because there will come a point where your key employees are exhausted, and you need to have fresh resources available to come in and spare those individuals so they can get rest, and then they can resume their other responsibilities. How will a Coop event affect you? You heard Larry's numbers. 4,300 businesses in our community closed as a result of Ivan. In our community, 6,000 homes were destroyed, 12,000 homes experienced major damage. 105,000 homes were affected by Hurricane Ivan. We know that 79,000 families had to resort to FEMA for assistance in their recovery. Those statistics tell us the impact of an Ivan-like event, and Ivan was a Category 3 hurricane on a 5-category scale. So we haven't seen the worst impact that we could see as a community. Your leadership will be affected because they're going to have to turn to alternative roles than they traditionally fulfill, and defining what those roles will be ahead of time is a critical consideration. Your operations are going to be impacted. Security needs to be a concern, because the reality is public safety personnel aren't going to be available in the same ways that they are during standard operations, and you need to be aware that looting is always a possibility during times of disaster. Maintaining communications, again, is a critical component. Your staff are going to be uncertain about what you're going to be doing, how long you're going to be away from the family. You need to be communicating with those family members ahead of time so they know what to expect. I can assure you, my wife knows that during a disaster, I'm not going to be available for however long it takes, and I will see her when I see her. But she's planned to evacuate the area. Instead of a disaster supply kit, we have an RV. So that is her disaster kit and her transportation plan. Job security can become an issue, especially to those individuals that aren't part of your continuity of operations plan, and making sure you're communicating with them throughout the disaster to assure them that the actions you're taking are to preserve the organization. Economic well-being. The bottom line is that just as safety was an issue for the first responders in our community, ensuring that the families will have a resource to receive your paycheck during times of disaster is a critical concern of those family members, and planning for those eventualities is an important part of your continuity of operations plan. Included within the packet of materials you have are is information about critical business functions, employees, contact information. Please take time to look through that. All of these are fillable forms. You will find these forms through the link that you see identified on those pages. All of these forms are fillable to make it simple for you. I found this to be one of the easiest ways of capturing data, ensuring it's portable on a thumb drive or other ways of communicating. Cloud storage is certainly viable and cost-effective at this time. Having that kind of information stored in the cloud can be very, very valuable in addition to a thumb drive or other ways of transporting that information. All of these things need to be considered as you're working with your employees on planning for disasters. And the bottom line in all of this is it has to be, you have to train individuals, you have to develop the plan. You have to train individuals on the plan. You have to exercise that plan on a regular basis to ensure that it's going to be performed effectively during times of major disaster. And our community will be impacted. We don't know when, but we know it will. Questions?
One more piece, Greg, again, that I think is not and it all revolves around duct tape.
Yes, sir? I'm interested in hearing where you're going.
Greg, you dropped something.
Thank you.
We have an interstate, we have railroads, and we have the intercoastal waterway that all run through our community. There are literally tons of hazardous materials that are transported through our county every day. And the probability of a hazardous material accident spill in the community is relatively high.
It is.
And one element of a good Coop plan is plan for what's called shelter in place. Because if a tanker truck loaded with liquid chlorine rolls over on I-10 and runs into a guardrail and it's ruptured, there's going to be a cloud of chlorine gas that's going to move very quickly, a long ways, covering a big part of our population very quickly. And the proper response for that kind of a disaster is for people to shelter in place.
Good point.
And what that means is that you need to have preferably an interior room, if you have an interior room, and a supply of duct tape. So you can go around and tape up all the windows and the doors and all the seams for getting into that place. And then the plan is you stay there until somebody tells you you can come out. So that we tend to think about hurricanes all the time. But there are other potential hazards that can be just as devastating to your not-for-profit as a hurricane.
To emphasize what Skip is saying, 90% of the population of Escambia County is within a zone that a hazardous material spill could impact 90% of the population of Escambia County. In your packet of materials is a property protection checklist for a variety of different hazards. That may be the best starting place for your review and your planning, and to make sure that I cover the things that I was asked to cover. The material that you put together for your disaster plan, I would suggest that you share that with your insurance agent, because then they will know how to plan for business interruption insurance. They will know how to plan for other insurance elements that may not be part of your coverage at the present time. Anything else while they're setting up? All right.